The sleek Zephyrian battlecruiser Sovereign's Pride drifted silently through the void, its crystalline hull reflecting the distant stars like fractured diamonds. Admiral Crixtal stood on the bridge, her elongated fingers dancing across holographic displays with practiced precision. The war against the brutal Vakmor Empire had raged for 3 cycles now, and the tide was turning against the coalition of free worlds. "Admiral, we're receiving transmission from the human vessel," reported Lieutenant Vel SH, his voice carrying the characteristic whistle of his species. The young officer's bioluminescent patches flickered nervously across his blue-scaled skin. Crixtal's primary eyes narrowed while her secondary pair remained fixed on the tactical display. Humans. The newest species to join the coalition, barely 2 rotations since their first contact. Most races in the galaxy considered them primitive, having only recently achieved faster-than-light travel. Their technology was crude by galactic standards, their ships cobbled together from salvaged parts and outdated designs. "Put them through," she commanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded fleets before these humans had even left their home system. The main viewscreen shimmered, revealing the bridge of the human vessel Defiant. Captain Sarah Chen stood at the center, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, her brown eyes sharp with intelligence. Behind her, the bridge looked chaotic compared to the sterile perfection of Zephyrian design. Cables snaked across surfaces, jury-rigged equipment hummed loudly, and the crew moved with an energy that seemed almost manic. "Admiral Crixtal," Chen said, offering a respectful nod. "We've analyzed the Vakmor battle formation ahead. My tactical officer has some suggestions." Crixtal's throat sacs inflated slightly, a sign of barely contained irritation. The audacity of these newcomers never ceased to amaze her. "Captain Chen, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but the Vakmor Thunder Wall formation has been studied for generations. Our best military minds have developed counter-strategies that minimize losses while maximizing effectiveness." Chen's expression didn't change, but Crixtal noticed a slight tightening around her eyes. "With respect, Admiral, those strategies are getting our people killed. The Vakmor have adapted. They're using our predictability against us." A holographic display between them showed the approaching enemy fleet. 50 Vakmor dreadnoughts arranged in their infamous Thunder Wall formation, a solid line of destruction that had broken countless coalition fleets. Each ship bristled with plasma cannons and kinetic accelerators, their dark hulls absorbing sensor sweeps like hungry shadows. "The standard response," Crixtal continued, gesturing to the display, "is to deploy our forces in the HFThe diamond formation. It distributes damage across multiple vectors while maintaining concentrated firepower. It is efficient and proven." "It's also exactly what they expect," Chen replied. Behind her, a young human officer with bright red hair leaned forward, whispering something urgent. Chen nodded. "My tactical officer, Lieutenant Murphy, has identified a pattern. The Vakmor have been studying our responses. Every time we use traditional formations, they're ready. They've turned our own military doctrine into a weapon against us." Crixtal's secondary eyes focused on the human captain while her primary pair studied the tactical data. The HFThe diamond had indeed suffered higher casualties in recent engagements. She had attributed it to Vakmor technological improvements, but, perhaps. "What do you propose?" she asked, though her tone suggested skepticism. Chen smiled, and Crixtal was struck by how predatory the expression looked. "We stop fighting like civilized beings and start fighting like humans." Before Crixtal could respond, proximity alarms began wailing throughout both ships. The Vakmor fleet had emerged from hyperspace, their massive forms blotting out the stars. The Thunder Wall formation was even more imposing in person than on tactical displays. Each dreadnought was twice the size of the largest coalition vessel, their hulls scarred from countless battles. All ships assumed HFThe diamond formation, Crixtal commanded automatically, her training taking over. The coalition fleet, numbering 37 vessels, began to shift into the traditional defensive posture. "Admiral, wait," Chen's voice cut through the communications chatter. "Give us 30 seconds. Just 30 seconds to show you something different." Crixtal hesitated. Military doctrine demanded immediate implementation of proven strategies. But the desperation in the human captain's voice, combined with the mounting losses they'd suffered using those same proven strategies, made her pause. 30 seconds, she agreed. "But if this fails, Captain Chen, I will personally." "Understood, Admiral." Murphy, execute Chaos Protocol Alpha." The human ship Defiant suddenly, broke formation, accelerating directly toward the center of the Vakmor Thunder Wall. Krixtal watched in horror as the small human vessel, barely a tenth the size of a Vakmor dreadnought, charged straight into certain destruction.
What are they doing? Lieutenant VelSH gasped. It's suicide.
But, as Krixtal watched, something unexpected happened.
The Defiant didn't fire its weapons.
Instead, it began transmitting on all frequencies, broadcasting everything from human music to mathematical equations to what appeared to be cooking recipes.
The cacophony was overwhelming, flooding the electromagnetic spectrum with meaningless noise. The Vakmor response was immediate and predictable.
Their formation tightened, concentrating fire on the single ship that dared to approach. Plasma bolts and kinetic rounds filled the space around the Defiant, creating a deadly light show against the black of space. But the human ship danced between the attacks with impossible grace. It spun and rolled, dove and climbed, following no pattern that Krixtal could discern.
More importantly, its erratic course was causing the Vakmor ships to turn their weapons inward, trying to track the target.
The perfect line of the Thunder Wall began to waver as ships adjusted their positions. Now, Chen's voice crackled over the calm hit their overlapping fields. Krixtal's primary eyes snapped to the tactical display. The Vakmor formation, in turning to engage the single human ship, had created gaps in their defensive coverage. Small windows where their overlapping shields no longer provided complete protection. All ships, Krixtal commanded, her voice cutting through the bridge chatter.
Target coordinates uploading now. Full assault on marked positions. The Coalition fleet opened fire as one.
Particle beams and torpedo salvos struck the Vakmor formation at precisely the moments when their defenses were weakest. 3 dreadnoughts shuddered under the concentrated assault, their shields flickering and failing. Meanwhile, the Defiant continued its impossible dance through the enemy fire. Krixtal realized that what had appeared to be random movement was actually carefully calculated chaos. The human ship was forcing the Vakmor to react, to abandon their rigid formation discipline in favor of pursuing a single target.
How is that ship still intact? VelSH wondered aloud.
Krixtal studied the sensor readings more carefully. The human vessel's shields were failing, armor was being stripped away, but it continued to move with that same unpredictable pattern. Then, she saw it, a detail that made her throat sacs contract in amazement. The humans weren't just dodging. They were using the Vakmor's own weapons against them. Plasma bolts meant for the Defiant were striking other Vakmor ships as the formation collapsed into chaos. The humans had turned the enemy's overwhelming firepower into a liability. Incredible, she whispered. They're using the Vakmor's strength against them. A second wave of Coalition fire struck the confused Vakmor formation. 2 more dreadnoughts suffered critical damage, their massive hulls venting atmosphere and coolant into space. The perfect Thunder Wall was now a scattered collection of ships, each trying to re-establish formation while dealing with hull breaches and system failures. The Defiant finally broke away from the enemy formation, its hull glowing cherry red from heat damage. But it had accomplished something impossible. A single small ship had disrupted a formation that had destroyed entire fleets. All ships, pressing attack, Krixtal ordered, her voice carrying new confidence. Maintain pressure on damaged vessels. Do not allow them to reform. The battle that followed was unlike any the Coalition had fought. Instead of the methodical, predictable engagement that Vakmor doctrine expected, it became a swirling melee. Human ships darted between larger vessels like angry insects, their weapons striking at unexpected angles. Zephyrian cruisers used the confusion to launch devastating flanking attacks. Even the usually cautious hegemony defense ships pushed forward aggressively. Within 2 hours, the legendary Vakmor Thunder Wall formation was broken. 7 dreadnoughts destroyed, 12 more crippled and retreating. The remaining Vakmor ships withdrew in disorder, their perfect military precision shattered by 30 seconds of pure human chaos. As the enemy fleet disappeared into hyperspace, Krixtal found herself staring at the tactical display in wonder. The Coalition had just achieved something that military strategists had deemed impossible. They had broken the Thunder Wall with minimal losses. Captain Chen, she said, opening a communication channel. That was extraordinary. How did you know it would work? Chen's image appeared on the viewscreen, her face streaked with sweat and her uniform torn from the violent maneuvers her ship had endured. But she was smiling. Admiral, every military in the galaxy fights the same way. Clean formations, predictable tactics, logical responses.
The Vakmor have built their entire strategy around that predictability. And humans fight differently?
Humans fight to win, Chen replied simply. We don't care if our tactics look elegant or follow proper military doctrine. We care about survival. And, sometimes, the best way to survive is to be completely unpredictable.
Krikstal's secondary eye studied the damage reports flooding in. Coalition casualties were the lowest they had been in any major engagement since the war began.
The humans had achieved in 30 seconds what conventional tactics had failed to do in 3 cycles of warfare.
Captain, I believe the coalition needs to learn more about human military philosophy. Chen's smile widened. Admiral, we're just getting started.
What you saw today was improvisation. Give us time to really plan something, and we'll show the galaxy what human warfare can accomplish. As the coalition fleet began rescue operations and damage assessment, Krikstal found herself reconsidering everything she thought she knew about military strategy. The humans had just demonstrated that sometimes the most effective approach was to abandon all approaches and simply adapt in real time. The war against the Vakmor Empire was far from over, but something had changed in the balance of power.
The galaxy's newest species had brought something new to interstellar warfare, something that rigid military doctrine couldn't counter. They had brought chaos. And, in the cold mathematics of space combat, chaos could be the most powerful weapon of all.
The Sovereign's pride drifted through the debris field that had once been an impenetrable Vakmor formation. Around them, the coalition fleet was already adapting, ship captains discussing new tactics over encrypted channels. The humans had opened a door to new possibilities, and Krikstal suspected that the galaxy would never be the same. In the depths of space, where the silence was broken only by the hum of life support systems and the distant glow of stars, a revolution in military thinking had just begun. And, at its center were the humans, the species that fought not with perfect formations or elegant strategies, but with pure, uncompromising determination to survive. The Thunder Wall was broken. But, more importantly, the rigid thinking that had dominated galactic warfare for millennia had been shattered along with it. The humans had shown that sometimes the best strategy was to have no strategy at all, to respond to each moment with deadly improvisation. As Krikstal watched the human ships moving through the battlefield, she realized that the coalition had gained far more than new allies. They had gained a new way of thinking about war itself. And that, she suspected, would prove to be the most valuable weapon in their arsenal. The Coalition War Council chamber buzzed with tension as representatives from dozens of species gathered around the massive holographic display. Admiral Krikstal watched the replay of the Thunder Wall engagement for the 15th time, her elongated fingers tracing patterns in the air as she analyzed every detail. Beside her, General Thanax of the Hegemony Defense Force clicked his mandibles in what might have been approval or disapproval, while Ambassador Yilnara's tentacles writhed with barely contained excitement. Captain Sarah Chen stood at the center of the chamber, her human crew arrayed behind her. The past week had brought a parade of military officials wanting to understand how 30 seconds of chaos had accomplished what 3 cycles of conventional warfare had failed to achieve. Chen looked tired but alert, her dark eyes moving from one alien face to another as she prepared to explain human military philosophy to beings who had been fighting wars before her species had discovered fire. The fundamental problem, Chen began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's translation systems, is that everyone in this galaxy fights the same war. General Thanax's compound eyes focused on her with sharp intensity.
Explain this assertion, human.
Our species have developed distinct tactical doctrines over millennia of conflict. Chen gestured toward the holographic display, where the broken remains of the Thunder Wall formation slowly rotated.
You all use formations.
You all maintain discipline. You all follow predictable patterns that can be studied, analyzed, and countered.
The Vakmor have spent generations learning to exploit these patterns.
Discipline wins wars, Ambassador Yilnara interjected, her translator giving her synthesized voice a mechanical quality.
Chaos leads to defeat and unnecessary casualties.
Does it? Chen asked, highlighting a section of the battle replay. Look at the casualty figures from conventional engagements versus our improvised assault. We lost 0 ships breaking the Thunder Wall.
Your last 3 attempts to engage the same formation cost you 47 vessels.
The chamber fell silent as the harsh mathematics of warfare displayed themselves in cold holographic light. Krikstal had reviewed these numbers herself, checking and rechecking the data because they seemed impossible. But there was no denying the evidence. Lieutenant Murphy stepped forward, his red hair almost glowing under the chamber's lights. The key insight is understanding the difference between chaos and randomness, he said, his young voice betraying none of the nervousness he must have felt addressing the galaxy's most senior military leaders.
What we did wasn't random. It was controlled chaos, designed to force specific responses. Elaborate, General Phainax commanded.
Murphy nodded toward the display, which shifted to show a detailed analysis of the Defiant's flight path. Every movement we made was calculated to maximize disruption while minimizing our exposure to concentrated fire.
We studied Vakmor response protocols and identified their decision trees.
When faced with an erratic target, they follow specific patterns. We exploited those patterns. Commodore Zarthek of the Kethri Navy leaned forward, his crystalline features reflecting the holographic light in rainbow patterns.
You are suggesting that unpredictability can be predictable?
Exactly, Chen replied. The Vakmor trained to counter organized military formations. They never learned to handle what humans call controlled chaos. It's a concept that comes naturally to us because our homeworld forced us to develop it.
Your homeworld?
Crixtal asked, her secondary eyes studying the tactical data while her primary pair remained focused on Chen. Earth is a death world by most galactic standards, Chen explained. Violent weather, seismic instability, predators that evolved alongside us for millions of years. Human military doctrine developed not from academic study, but from thousands of years of fighting for survival against opponents that couldn't be reasoned with or predicted. Dr. Hith Allen, the Coalition's chief military strategist, activated his own display showing comparative evolutionary data. Most spacefaring species evolved on stable worlds with predictable environments. Their military thinking reflects this stability. Humans evolved in constant chaos. Which means, Murphy continued, that while other species developed military doctrine based on control and order, humans developed tactics based on adaptation and survival.
We don't have one way to fight. We have whatever way works in the moment.
General Phainax's mandibles clicked more rapidly. This suggests that human tactics cannot be systematically taught or implemented by other species.
Chen shook her head. Not the specific tactics, no. But the underlying principle can be learned. The willingness to abandon doctrine when doctrine isn't working.
The ability to respond to changing conditions without waiting for orders from command hierarchy. Impossible, Commodore Zarthek stated flatly. Military effectiveness requires chain of command, established procedures, coordinated responses.
What you describe is anarchy.
No, said a new voice from the chamber's entrance.
What they describe is evolution. All eyes turned toward the newcomer.
Admiral Veltar, Supreme Commander of Coalition Forces, entered with his characteristic measured pace. The elderly Zephyrian had led the Coalition military for over 2 decades, his strategic mind widely respected throughout the galaxy.
Admiral, Crixtal said, rising from her seat. We weren't expecting you.
Veltar moved to the central display, his 4 eyes taking in the battle analysis with practiced efficiency.
I've been studying Captain Chen's reports. And I've been thinking about why we're losing this war.
The chamber's atmosphere grew heavy with anticipation.
Admiral Veltar's strategic assessments had shaped coalition policy for years.
The truth, he continued, is that the Vakmor Empire has been adapting while we have been stagnating. They study our formations, learn our patterns, develop counters to our strategies. Meanwhile, we continue to refine the same basic approaches our ancestors used.
Sir, Dr. Hith Allen interjected, our tactical doctrine has proven effective across countless conflicts.
Against enemies who fought like us, Veltar replied.
The Vakmor don't fight like us. They fight like predators.
And they've been studying their prey for 3 cycles.
He turned toward Chen. Captain, show them the Procyon engagement. Chen nodded to Murphy, who activated a new holographic display.
The chamber filled with images of a recent battle, one that had occurred just 5 days after the Thunder Wall engagement. The Vakmor tried to use a modified Thunder Wall formation, Chen explained. They adapted their positioning to counter traditional coalition responses. But they didn't know how to adapt to counter something they'd never encountered before. The holographic battle unfolded before the assembled officials. 3 human ships, working in loose coordination with Zephyrian and Kethri vessels, had engaged a Vakmor force twice their size. But, instead of the rigid formations the Vakmor expected, the coalition forces moved like a living organism, responding to each other's actions without apparent central coordination.
How is this possible? Ambassador Yilnara asked.
Effective military action requires centralized command and control.
Not necessarily, Murphy replied. Human military units train extensively in what we called mission-type orders.
Instead of telling individual units exactly what to do, commanders explain what needs to be accomplished and trust their subordinates to figure out how to do it. The result, Chen added, is that human units can adapt to changing battlefield conditions faster than any centralized command structure could respond. When one approach fails, they immediately try another without waiting for new orders.
General Thanax studied the Procyon battle data.
This requires an extraordinary level of trust between commanders and subordinates.
It does, Chen agreed. And it requires subordinates who are trained to think for themselves rather than simply follow orders.
Most human military personnel are cross-trained in multiple specialties and are expected to take initiative when necessary.
Commodore Zarthek's crystalline features shifted to display skepticism.
Such an approach must result in massive coordination failures and conflicting actions.
Sometimes, Chen admitted.
But the advantages outweigh the disadvantages. When coordination fails, individual units can still accomplish their missions independently.
When a formation is broken, human units don't collapse, they adapt.
The holographic display showed the climax of the Procyon engagement, where a damaged human destroyer had used its dying reactor as an improvised weapon, ramming a Vakmor battleship and destroying both vessels. The action had been taken without orders, without consultation, simply because the ship's captain recognized an opportunity and had the authority to act on it.
Savage, whispered Dr. Hith Allen.
Effective, Admiral Veltar corrected. That destroyer's sacrifice allowed the coalition forces to win a battle they should have lost. He turned to address the entire chamber.
The humans have shown us something we've forgotten.
Military doctrine should serve victory, not the other way around. Krixtal felt a strange sensation in her throat sacs, something between excitement and apprehension.
Admiral, are you suggesting that we restructure coalition military doctrine around human principles?
I'm suggesting, Veltar replied, that we learn from the humans while maintaining our own strengths.
The Zephyrians excel at strategic coordination.
The Ketheri are unmatched in defensive formations.
The hegemony's assault tactics are devastatingly effective.
But we've been using these strengths in predictable ways.
Chen nodded enthusiastically. That's exactly right. We don't want to turn everyone into humans. We want to teach everyone to think like humans when the situation demands it. How do you propose to implement this? General Thanax asked.
Murphy activated a new display showing organizational charts and training protocols.
We've developed a 3-phase program. Phase 1 involves cross-training coalition officers in human tactical philosophy. Not specific techniques, but the underlying mindset that prioritizes adaptation over doctrine. Phase 2, Chen continued, involves joint exercises where mixed units practice responding to unpredictable scenarios.
The goal is to develop the ability to coordinate without rigid structure.
And Phase 3? Admiral Veltar inquired.
Phase 3, Chen said with a slight smile, is where we show the Vakmor what happens when the entire coalition military thinks like humans.
The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in.
For millennia, galactic warfare had followed established patterns, predictable ebb and flow of strategy and counter-strategy. The humans were proposing to shatter those patterns entirely.
The risks are enormous, Ambassador Yilnara pointed out.
If this approach fails, we could lose the coordination and discipline that has held the coalition together. If we continue with current approaches, Admiral Veltar replied, we will lose this war within 2 cycles.
The humans have given us a chance to change the equation. Commodore Zarthek's features shifted to display what his species considered deep thought.
There is wisdom in adaptation.
The Ketheri have prospered by learning to bend rather than break.
He paused, his crystalline eyes reflecting the holographic displays. But implementation will require careful planning.
Our species think differently, react differently. What works for humans may not work for us.
That's why the program emphasizes principles over specific tactics, Murphy explained.
We're not trying to turn Ketheri ships into human ships.
We're trying to give Ketheri commanders the tools to respond like humans when the situation demands it. Dr. Hithallen leaned forward, his scientific mind clearly engaged.
The psychological implications are fascinating.
Most military training focuses on reducing individual decision-making in favor of predictable group responses.
You're proposing to do the opposite. In certain situations, yes, Chen replied. The key is knowing when to follow doctrine and when to abandon it. Most of our training will focus on developing that judgment.
Admiral Veltar moved closer to the central display, his four eyes studying the battle data with renewed interest.
Captain Chen, how soon can your people begin training coalition officers?
We can start immediately, sir. We've already identified several human officers with teaching experience, and we've developed simulation programs that can be adapted for different species.
Do it, Veltar commanded. Begin with volunteer units from each species.
I want to see how effective this approach can be when implemented by non-human forces. Krixtal felt her throat sacs flutter with something that might have been excitement.
The implications were staggering.
If humans could teach other species to fight with their adaptive flexibility while maintaining their own natural strengths, the coalition might gain an insurmountable advantage.
Admiral, she said, what about operational security? If the Vakmor learn what we're planning, they won't be able to counter it, Chen interrupted. That's the point.
You can't develop a counter-strategy to something that has no fixed strategy. The Vakmor strength lies in their ability to analyze and exploit predictable patterns. Take away the patterns, and you take away their advantage. General Phainax's mandibles clicked in what Krixtal had learned to recognize as approval.
There is elegance in this approach.
Use the enemy's strength against them by denying them the patterns they seek to exploit.
Exactly, Murphy agreed. The Vakmor have built their entire military doctrine around the assumption that their enemies will behave predictably. We're going to prove that assumption wrong.
As the meeting continued into the night cycle, Krixtal found herself looking at the humans with new understanding. They weren't just another species that had joined the coalition. They were a catalyst that could transform how the galaxy thought about warfare itself. The Thunder Wall engagement had been just the beginning. What Chen and her people were proposing would reshape the fundamental nature of interstellar conflict. Instead of the predictable dance of strategy and counter-strategy that had defined galactic warfare, they would introduce true chaos into the equation.
And chaos, as the humans had proven, could be the most powerful weapon of all.
The training facility on Kepler Station buzzed with activity as beings from across the coalition worked together in ways that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. Admiral Krixtal observed from the observation deck as a mixed unit of Zephyrian, Ketheri, Hegemony, and human officers ran through their 15th simulation of the day. Below her, chaos reigned in the most organized possible way. Lieutenant Commander Velnax, a Ketheri officer whose crystalline carapace reflected the simulation chamber's lights and rainbow patterns, was coordinating with Captain Maria Santos, a human whose dark skin gleamed with sweat from the intensity of the exercise. Behind them, Hegemony Assault Leader Crixinael moved with the fluid grace of his species, while Ensign Euthera's bioluminescent patches flashed in rapid sequences as she processed multiple data streams simultaneously.
Contact bearing 27 Mark IV, Velnax announced, his translated voice carrying the precision his species was known for. Vakmor Heavy Cruiser Squadron, Standard Hammer Formation.
In the old days, Krixtal knew, the response would have been immediate and predictable. Ketheri doctrine called for the prism defense formation when facing hammer attacks.
The enemy would expect it, plan for it, and ultimately counter it. But what happened next would have been impossible 3 months ago.
Suggestions? Santos asked, her voice calm despite the simulated weapons fire erupting around their position.
Ketheri doctrine recommends prism defense, Velnax reported. Maximum shield efficiency, overlapping fire zones. Hegemony assault protocol suggests thunder strike formation, Crixinael added, his mandibles clicking as he processed tactical data.
Concentrated assault on formation center. Zephyrian strategy indicates flowing water approach, Euthera contributed.
Use superior maneuverability to strike formation edges. Santos nodded, processing the input. Good options. All proven effective.
All completely predictable. She studied the tactical display for a moment.
What if we use our predictability as a weapon?
The alien officers looked puzzled, and Krixtal found herself leaning forward to hear the human captain's reasoning.
We start with prism defense, Santos continued. Let them commit to their counter-strategy.
Then, we shift to Thunder Strike at the moment they expect us to reinforce the defense. When they adapt to counter the assault, we flow into flowing water. We use their expectations to keep them constantly reacting instead of acting. Velnax's carapace shifted to a deep blue, indicating intense calculation. The coordination required would be unprecedented. 3 different tactical doctrines in rapid succession. That's what makes it work, Santos replied. They can't predict it because it requires capabilities they don't think we have. What followed was perhaps the most complex tactical maneuver Krixtal had ever witnessed. The mixed coalition unit began in perfect HFThe formation, shields overlapping in crystalline precision. The simulated Vakmor forces responded exactly as their doctrine demanded, moving to exploit the formation's known weaknesses. At the critical moment, Santos gave a single command, flow. The HFThe ships maintained their defensive posture while hegemony assault vessels broke formation and drove straight into the heart of the enemy formation. The Vakmor simulation, programmed with thousands of hours of actual combat data, began adjusting to counter the Thunder Strike approach. Flow, Santos commanded again. Now the Zephyrian ships revealed their true positions, having used advanced stealth systems to mask their flanking maneuvers. They struck the Vakmor formation from 3 sides simultaneously while the hegemony ships pulled back to defensive positions and HFThe vessels advanced to provide covering fire. The simulation ended with the complete destruction of the Vakmor force and minimal coalition casualties. Impossible, whispered Dr. Hithallen beside Krixtal. No unit should be able to transition between 3 different tactical doctrines that rapidly. 6 months ago, you would have been right, said a familiar voice behind them. Captain Chen entered the observation deck, her expression pleased but not surprised. But humans have been teaching coalition officers something that can't be found in any tactical manual. Which is? Krixtal asked. Trust, Chen replied simply. The ability to trust that your companions will do their jobs without micromanagement. That's what makes rapid tactical transitions possible. Below them, the mixed unit was already running through their next simulation. This time, they faced a Vakmor Star Fortress scenario, one of the most challenging tactical problems in the Coalition databases. Krixtal watched as the human training methodology unfolded. Instead of assigning specific roles and formations, Santos simply outlined the objective and asked for input. Each species contributed their expertise, but no single doctrine dominated the planning. Traditional approach would be siege formation, Velnax observed. Systematic reduction of defensive capabilities. Time-consuming and predictable, Krixinal pointed out. Vakmor reinforcements would arrive before fortress fell. Ythera's patches flickered rapidly. Stealth approach possible, but fortress sensors would detect traditional infiltration patterns. Santos studied the fortress design, her human mind working through possibilities that linear military thinking might miss. What if we don't infiltrate? What if we make them come to us? Explain, Velnax requested. Star fortresses are designed to be impregnable defensive positions, Santos said. But that assumes the enemy will come to them. What if we make them choose between defending the fortress and saving something more important? The plan that emerged challenged every principle of siege warfare. Instead of attacking the fortress directly, the coalition unit would strike at Vakmor supply convoys in the surrounding system. The fortress's massive weapons couldn't engage targets at such range, and protocol demanded that the garrison respond to protect vital logistics. When the fortress dispatched its mobile defenses, the coalition forces would eliminate them in open space where their superior coordination could be fully utilized. The fortress itself would be left isolated and eventually forced to surrender when its supplies ran out. Elegant, Dr. Hithallen admitted. It turns the fortress's strength into a weakness. More than that, Chen replied. It forces the Vakmor to fight the kind of mobile engagement where human-trained tactics are most effective. The simulation bore out the strategy's effectiveness. The Star Fortress scenario, which typically resulted in heavy coalition casualties even in victory, was resolved with minimal losses and in record time. Captain Chen, Krixtal said, how many officers have completed this training program? We're up to 3,000 across all coalition species, Chen replied. Each trained officer returns to their home units and begins teaching others. It's growing exponentially. And the Vakmor haven't detected the change in our capabilities? Chen smiled, an expression that Krixtal had learned to associate with human satisfaction.
Admiral, the Vakmor are still preparing to counter tactics we abandoned months ago.
Their intelligence services are excellent at analyzing fixed doctrines, but they don't know how to assess constantly evolving capabilities. A new voice joined the conversation as Admiral Veltar entered the observation deck. The elderly Zephyrian moved with purpose, his four eyes already studying the simulation data.
Admiral, Krixtal said, rising in respect. How goes the fleet reorganization?
Ahead of schedule, Veltar replied. Every major coalition fleet now has human-trained officers integrated into their command structure. But, more importantly, we've identified something the humans call force multipliers.
Chen nodded. Species-specific advantages that become exponentially more effective when combined with adaptive tactics.
For example, Veltar continued, activating a holographic display, Ketheric crystalline hulls can war Admiral Thekanear stood in the command center of the massive Vakmor flagship Dominion's Fist, his scarred chitinous hide reflecting the red glow of holographic displays. Around him, the greatest military minds of the Vakmor Empire worked with mechanical precision, coordinating the movements of the 7th Fleet with the efficiency that had made them the terror of the galaxy. Status report, he commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never tasted defeat. All battle groups have reached their assigned positions, reported Fleet Captain Vector, his younger features unmarked by the ritual scars that denoted Thekanear's veteran status.
Coalition defensive formations are exactly where our intelligence predicted.
The Arcturus sector is ours for the taking. Thekanear studied the tactical display with the satisfaction of a predator contemplating helpless prey.
3 cycles of warfare had taught him everything about coalition military doctrine. They would defend their key installations with overlapping defensive formations.
They would attempt to minimize losses through conservative tactics. They would follow predictable patterns that could be analyzed, countered, and exploited. Begin the assault, he ordered.
Standard storm pattern deployment.
I want the Kepler station defensive grid eliminated within 6 hours. The Vakmor 7th Fleet moved with the terrible beauty of a perfect military machine.
37 dreadnoughts advanced in formation, their escort vessels maintaining precise positions as they approached their objectives. It was, Thekanear knew, a textbook example of overwhelming force properly applied.
The first indication that something was wrong came when the coalition forces began to move. Sir, Fleet Captain Vector reported, his voice carrying a note of confusion.
The enemy formations are dispersing.
Thekanear's primary eyes focused on the display while his secondary pair studied sensor readings. The coalition forces, instead of maintaining their defensive positions as doctrine demanded, were breaking apart into smaller groups and moving in seemingly random directions.
Tactical withdrawal, he concluded after a moment's analysis.
They're attempting to minimize losses by avoiding direct confrontation. Predictable but futile.
Should we pursue the individual groups? Asked Battlegroup Commander Rixtal. No, Thekanear replied. They're trying to draw us away from our objectives. We'll secure the strategic targets first, then eliminate the scattered survivors at our leisure. What happened next challenged everything the Vakmor military understood about warfare. The coalition forces didn't retreat to defensive positions as expected. Instead, they attacked.
Not the primary Vakmor fleet, but everything else. Supply convoys traveling to support the offensive found themselves under assault by fast-moving coalition strike forces. Communication relays throughout the sector went dark as human-led teams struck with surgical precision. Fuel depots, ammunition stockpiles, and repair facilities began reporting enemy contact. Sir, Vector's voice now carried obvious concern, we're receiving distress signals from 17 different facilities throughout the sector. The coalition forces appear to be everywhere simultaneously. Thekanear studied the reports with growing unease. This wasn't standard military doctrine. Coalition forces had never demonstrated this level of coordination while maintaining such dispersed deployment. It suggested capabilities they shouldn't possess. Analysis, he demanded. Unknown, sir, admitted Chief Strategist Naelvek, his mechanical voice betraying none of the confusion that must be churning behind his augmented brain.
Coalition forces are operating in patterns that don't match any known tactical doctrine.
Their coordination suggests centralized command, but their deployment suggests autonomous operation.
Impossible, Thekanear stated flatly.
No military force can maintain effective coordination while dispersed across multiple sectors.
They must be following some predetermined plan.
But, even as he spoke, the situation continued to deteriorate.
The scattered coalition forces weren't just attacking randomly.
They were targeting the Vakmor's most vulnerable points with a precision that suggested real-time intelligence and adaptive planning. "Sir," reported Communications Officer HFThe, "we're losing contact with Battle Group 7.
Their last transmission indicated engagement with superior coalition forces near the Proxima facility."
HFThe's mind raced through the possibilities. Battle Group 7 consisted of 3 dreadnoughts and 20 escort vessels. For them to encounter superior coalition forces should have been impossible given the intelligence estimates of enemy deployment.
"Redirect Battle Groups 4 and 9 to support 7, he ordered. "And recall all dispersed elements. I want the fleet concentrated for maximum defensive capability."
"Sir,"
Vector ventured cautiously, "concentrating the fleet will allow the coalition forces to attack our objectives unopposed." "Better to lose objectives than lose ships," HFThe replied grimly. "Something is very wrong here." As the Vakmor fleet began to concentrate, the true scope of their predicament became clear. The coalition forces had used the Empire's own tactical doctrine against them.
By attacking dispersed targets simultaneously, they had forced HFThe to choose between protecting his logistics and maintaining his offensive. And, while he was making that choice, they had positioned themselves to exploit whatever decision he made.
"Contact from Battle Group 7, sir," HFThe reported.
"They report, this is difficult to believe, sir.
They report that coalition forces are using Vakmor tactical formations against them." "Explain." "The coalition vessels are executing storm pattern attacks, sir. But they're doing it wrong. Instead of maintaining formation discipline, they're improvising.
Making tactical adjustments in real time that our commanders can't counter." HFThe felt something he hadn't experienced in decades of warfare: uncertainty. The coalition was using Vakmor tactics, but incorrectly, and somehow that was making them more effective than proper implementation would have been.
"Sir," Chief Strategist NALVEC interjected, "I'm detecting a pattern in the coalition movements. They appear to be using multiple tactical doctrines simultaneously, transitioning between them faster than our force commanders can adapt."
The tactical display showed the truth of this assessment. Coalition task forces were engaging Vakmor units using recognizable formations, but they were switching between different species doctrines without warning.
A group that began an engagement using Ketheri defensive patterns would suddenly shift to hegemony assault tactics, then flow into Zephyrian mobility patterns.
"It's like fighting multiple different militaries simultaneously," Battlegroup Commander Rixtal reported from his own engagement. "Just when we develop a counter to their current approach, they change to something completely different." HFThe realized that he was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic warfare. The coalition had somehow developed the ability to coordinate multiple tactical doctrines in real time while maintaining the flexibility to adapt to changing circumstances.
"How is this possible?" he demanded. "Unknown, sir," NALVEC replied.
"But I'm detecting human communication signatures in all coalition task forces. It appears that human officers are integrated throughout their command structure."
"Humans," HFThe repeated the word like a curse.
"The newest species in the coalition, barely 2 rotations since first contact. Their military capabilities were supposed to be negligible." "Sir," Vector reported urgently, "Battle Groups 4 and 9 report heavy casualties. The coalition forces they're engaging are using our own support protocols against us. When our ships move to assist damaged vessels, the enemy is concentrating fire on the rescue attempts."
The implications were staggering.
The coalition wasn't just using different tactics, they were using Vakmor psychology against the Empire. They understood how Vakmor commanders would react in specific situations and were exploiting those predictable responses. "Sir," Communications Officer HFThe's voice cracked slightly, "I'm receiving reports from Battle Group 3.
They engaged a small coalition force near the Centauri depot.
The engagement appeared routine until, sir, the coalition ships began ramming attacks."
"Ramming attacks?" HFThe couldn't believe what he was hearing.
"No civilized military used ramming attacks. They were wasteful, unpredictable, and violated every principle of efficient warfare."
"Yes, sir.
But not suicide runs. They're using their damaged vessels as guided weapons while evacuating crews to other ships."
"It's unprecedented." HFThe stared at the tactical display as the truth became undeniable.
The humans had somehow taught the rest of the coalition to fight like barbarians. Not mindless savagery, but calculated barbarity that ignored conventional military wisdom in favor of pure effectiveness.
Fleet Captain Vector, he said slowly, recall all battle groups to defensive positions around the flagship.
We need to concentrate our forces and develop new tactical approaches. Sir, that will surrender the initiative completely to the coalition forces.
The initiative was never ours, THE and AR admitted with bitter clarity. They'd been controlling this engagement from the beginning. As the Vakmor 7th Fleet pulled back into defensive formation, reports continued to flood in from across the sector. Coalition forces were attacking with a ferocity and unpredictability that no amount of military analysis could counter.
They struck without warning, adapted to countermeasures in real time, and withdrew before concentrated retaliation could be organized. Sir, Chief Strategist NALVEC reported, our casualty assessment is significant.
We've lost 11 escort vessels and suffered major damage to 4 dreadnoughts. Coalition losses appear minimal. How minimal? 3 vessels confirmed destroyed, sir. 7 damaged but still operational.
THE and AR's primary and secondary eyes focused on the displays simultaneously as the mathematics of warfare delivered their verdict. The most powerful fleet in Vakmor history was being systematically dismantled by an enemy force half its size using tactics that shouldn't work. Sir, Vector said quietly, perhaps we should consider withdrawal. The word hung in the air like a curse.
The Vakmor 7th Fleet had never retreated from any engagement.
But they had also never faced an enemy that fought like this. Sir, Ythek interrupted, incoming transmission from the coalition flagship.
Put it through. The main display activated, revealing the bridge of a human vessel.
Captain Sarah Chen stood at the center, her expression calm and professional despite the chaos of battle surrounding her ship.
War Admiral THE and AR, she said with what might have been respect. I'm Captain Chen of the Coalition Task Force.
I wanted to offer you a chance to withdraw your forces before casualties become unacceptable.
THE and AR studied the human captain with intense curiosity.
She looked young by most species standards, her dark eyes clear and intelligent. There was no arrogance in her expression, no satisfaction at having gained tactical advantage.
Just calm professionalism.
Captain Chen, he replied, your forces are impressive.
But the 7th Fleet is not easily defeated. Chen nodded. We respect the 7th Fleet's reputation, Admiral.
That's why we developed specific tactics to counter your capabilities. You studied our previous engagements and built strategies around our predictable responses.
We've done the same to you.
You fight like barbarians, THE and AR said, meaning it as both accusation and compliment.
We fight to win, Chen corrected. Your military doctrine is based on the assumption that your enemies will fight according to established patterns. We've abandoned those patterns in favor of pure adaptability. And if I refuse your offer to withdraw?
Chen's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes.
Then, we'll show you what human warfare really looks like when we're not holding back. The transmission ended, leaving the Vakmor command center in silence.
THE and AR stared at the empty display, weighing options that all seemed to lead to unacceptable outcomes.
Sir? Vector asked quietly.
THE and AR had spent decades studying military history, analyzing successful campaigns, learning from the mistakes of defeated commanders. In all that time, he had never encountered a situation where the correct tactical decision was to abandon tactical thinking entirely. But that, he realized, was exactly what the humans had forced him to confront. They had created a scenario where traditional military wisdom was not just inadequate, but actively harmful.
Signal all battle groups, he said finally.
We're withdrawing from the Arcturus sector. The words came hard, but THE and AR was too experienced a commander to let pride override military necessity. The humans had outmaneuvered him not through superior firepower or better technology, but by fundamentally changing the nature of warfare itself.
As the Vakmor 7th Fleet began its retreat, THE and AR found himself contemplating an uncomfortable truth.
The galaxy's military balance had shifted, and the Empire would need to develop entirely new approaches if they hoped to counter this human-influenced coalition.
The humans hadn't just won a battle.
They had proven that the rigid military doctrines that had dominated galactic warfare for millennia could be overcome by species willing to abandon doctrine entirely in favor of pure adaptability. For the first time in his career, War Admiral THE and AR faced an enemy he didn't know how to defeat. The Great Assembly of the Vakmor Empire had not been convened in over 2 centuries. The massive chamber, carved from living obsidian deep within the heart of their homeworld, echoed with the clicking of countless chitin plates as representatives from across the Empire gathered to address an unprecedented crisis. Supreme War Leader HFY stood at the center of the assembly, his ancient carapace bearing the ritual scars of 1,000 battles. Around him, the greatest military minds of the Empire struggled to comprehend reports that challenged everything they understood about warfare. War Admiral HFY, HFY's voice resonated through the chamber's acoustic amplifiers, explained to this assembly how the Seventh Fleet was defeated by an inferior force. HFY rose from his position among the war leaders, his own scars seeming to burn under the assembly's collective gaze. Supreme War Leader, the coalition forces we encountered were not inferior. They were different. Different how? Demanded War Admiral HFThe, whose scarred mandibles clicked with aggressive skepticism. Their ships carry the same weapons, their hulls are constructed from the same materials. How can they be fundamentally different? They think differently, HFY replied. Everything we know about military doctrine assumes that our enemies will behave predictably. The humans have taught the coalition to abandon predictability entirely. A wave of agitated clicking swept through the assembly. The concept of abandoning military doctrine was almost incomprehensible to minds that had been shaped by millennia of rigid strategic thinking. Elaborate, HFY commanded. HFY activated the chamber's central holographic display, showing recordings from the Arcturus engagement. Observe their formation changes. Standard doctrine would suggest maintaining consistent tactical approaches to maximize coordination. The humans do the opposite. The display showed coalition forces shifting between different species' military doctrines with fluid grace. Cathari defensive formations flowed seamlessly into hegemony assault patterns, which transformed into Zephyrian mobility tactics without apparent coordination delays. How is this possible? Asked strategic analyst Mordek, her augmented brain processing the tactical data with mechanical precision. Such rapid doctrinal transition should result in coordination failures and massive casualties. That's what we assumed, HFY admitted. But, human military philosophy operates on different principles. Instead of maintaining rigid formations, they prioritize adaptability. Instead of following predetermined tactics, they respond to moment-by-moment changes in battlefield conditions. War Admiral HFThe's carapace shifted to display patterns of deep concern. This suggests that our entire strategic doctrine is vulnerable to these tactics. Not just vulnerable, HFY corrected grimly. Obsolete. The word hit the assembly like a physical blow. For centuries, Vakmor military supremacy had been built on superior strategic analysis, better logistical coordination, and more efficient tactical implementation. The idea that these advantages could be neutralized by mere unpredictability was almost unthinkable. What do you recommend? HFY asked. Before HFY could respond, a new voice cut through the chamber. Perhaps we should ask the humans directly. All eyes turned toward the speaker. Intelligence Coordinator Nixera moved with the fluid grace that her cybernetic enhancements provided, her sensors analyzing the assembly's reactions even as she spoke. Explain, HFY commanded. Our intelligence networks have been monitoring human communications since their integration into coalition forces, Nixera reported. We have identified the human captain who orchestrated the Arcturus engagement. The display shifted to show Captain Sarah Chen on the bridge of her vessel, coordinating the complex tactical maneuvers that had dismantled the Seventh Fleet. Even in recorded form, her calm competence was evident. Captain Chen has agreed to meet with our representatives under neutral conditions, Nixera continued. She claims to have insights that could benefit both sides. War Admiral HFThe's mandibles clacked aggressively. You would have us negotiate with the architect of our defeat? I would have us learn from someone who has demonstrated capabilities we lack, Nixera replied coolly. The humans have shown us weaknesses in our strategic thinking that we didn't know existed. Perhaps they can also show us how to address those weaknesses. The debate that followed stretched through several cycles, but, eventually pragmatism overcame pride. The Empire's military leaders were warriors first, and warriors understood the value of learning from superior opponents. The meeting was arranged at a neutral space station in the buffer zone between Empire and Coalition territory. The location was symbolic, Nixera thought, a place between the rigid order of Vakmor space and the chaotic adaptability of the Coalition. When Captain Chen arrived with her small delegation, Nixera was struck by how unremarkable the humans appeared. No ritual scars, no augmented capabilities, no obvious signs of superior evolution.
Just intelligent beings who had somehow revolutionized warfare itself.
War Admiral Thekanaar, Chen said as she entered the conference chamber, offering the respectful gesture that humans called a salute.
Thank you for agreeing to this meeting. Thekanaar studied the human captain with intense curiosity. Captain Chen, I must admit I'm uncertain why you requested this encounter.
Your forces have gained significant strategic advantages.
Why risk revealing your methods to your enemies? Chen smiled, an expression that Nixera had learned to associate with human amusement. Admiral, we're not trying to keep our methods secret. We're trying to prevent unnecessary destruction. Explain.
The war between the Empire and the Coalition has cost millions of lives and vast resources on both sides, Chen said, settling into the chamber's adaptive seating. Our tactical innovations have given the Coalition temporary advantages, but they won't last forever.
Strategic analyst Mordek's augmented brain processed this statement. You acknowledge that your advantages are temporary? Of course, Chen replied. Military adaptation is an arms race.
We develop new tactics, you develop counters, we develop counter-counters. The cycle continues indefinitely unless one side achieves overwhelming technological superiority or both sides choose to end the conflict. Thekanaar leaned forward, his primary eyes focusing intently on the human captain.
And, you believe both sides should choose to end the conflict?
I believe both sides should choose to evolve beyond it, Chen corrected. The techniques we've developed aren't just military tactics.
They're approaches to complex problem-solving that could benefit both civilizations. Nixera activated her recording systems, sensing that the conversation was approaching something significant. What kind of problem-solving approaches?
Chen gestured toward her aide, Lieutenant Murphy, who activated a holographic display. Human military doctrine is built around what we call adaptive coordination. The ability to work together effectively while maintaining individual flexibility. It's applicable to any situation where rigid planning meets unpredictable conditions. The display showed examples that had nothing to do with warfare. Human engineers coordinating disaster response efforts, adapting their approaches in real time as conditions changed.
Scientific teams working together to solve complex research problems, each member contributing unique expertise while maintaining collective focus.
Your species approaches problems by developing comprehensive plans and implementing them systematically, Chen continued. It's an effective approach when conditions remain stable.
But, when conditions change rapidly, systematic planning becomes a liability. War Admiral Vex Thursday's mandibles clicked skeptically. You're suggesting that planning itself is counterproductive? Not counterproductive, Chen clarified. Insufficient. Planning provides structure, but structure without adaptability becomes brittleness. What humans have learned is how to combine strategic planning with tactical flexibility. Lieutenant Murphy expanded the display to show organizational charts. Traditional military hierarchy flows information up and orders down.
Human-influenced organization flows information in all directions and distributes decision-making authority throughout the structure.
Chaos, Mordek concluded. Controlled chaos, Chen corrected.
Every individual unit maintains awareness of the overall objective while having the authority to pursue that objective through whatever means prove most effective. Thekanaar studied the organizational models with growing understanding.
This requires extraordinary trust between commanders and subordinates.
It does, Chen agreed.
And it requires subordinates who are trained to think strategically, not just tactically.
Every human soldier is taught to understand not just what they're supposed to do, but why they're supposed to do it.
And if individual units make wrong decisions? Nixera asked.
Then, they adapt, Murphy replied. Wrong decisions that are corrected quickly cause less damage than right decisions that can't be changed when conditions shift. The conversation continued for hours as the human delegation shared principles that challenged fundamental assumptions about organization, coordination, and strategic thinking. They weren't just revealing military tactics, they were demonstrating an entirely different approach to complex problem solving.
Why share this information with us? Thekanaar asked eventually.
You're giving away advantages that cost you years to develop. Chen was quiet for a moment, her expression thoughtful.
Admiral, humans believe that the galaxy is big enough for all of us to prosper. Competition drives innovation, but cooperation drives progress.
The techniques we've developed become more valuable when more people understand them.
Even if those people are your enemies?
Especially if they're our enemies, Chen replied. Enemies who understand each other can choose to become something else. Enemies who remain mysterious to each other have no choice but to keep fighting.
The implications were staggering.
The humans weren't just offering to share tactical innovations, they were proposing a fundamental transformation of how the Empire approached strategic challenges.
What would implementation require?
Kethvar's voice came through the communication link from the Empire homeworld, where the entire assembly had been monitoring the discussion.
Cultural change, Chen admitted. Your society values hierarchy, order, and systematic approach to problems.
Those are strengths, but they become weaknesses when the problems themselves are chaotic and unpredictable.
And human society values chaos? Nixera asked. Human society values adaptation, Chen clarified.
We've learned that the most effective approach to uncertainty is to embrace it rather than trying to eliminate it.
Murphy activated a new display showing comparative data.
Societies that adapt quickly to changing conditions tend to prosper over time. Societies that resist change tend to stagnate, regardless of their initial advantages.
The data was compelling.
Human civilization had progressed from primitive technology to interstellar capability in an incredibly short time, driven by their ability to adapt and innovate. Meanwhile, more advanced civilizations had remained relatively static for millennia. You're proposing that the Empire abandon successful traditions in favor of human approaches, War Admiral Vex Thursday observed. I'm proposing that the Empire enhance successful traditions with adaptive capabilities, Chen corrected.
You don't need to become human.
You need to become more than you currently are. The discussion that followed involved representatives from across the Empire, as military leaders, scientists, and social theorists debated the implications of human-inspired organizational principles. The conversation was sometimes heated, occasionally philosophical, but always focused on practical applications. By the end of the extended session, something unprecedented had occurred. The Vakmor Empire and the Coalition had begun discussing not just an end to hostilities, but active cooperation in developing new approaches to complex challenges.
This is remarkable, Nixera observed as the formal negotiations concluded. You've proposed something that could benefit both civilizations far more than continued warfare. Chen nodded. That's the point.
Humans have learned that the most effective competition often looks like cooperation.
When everyone gets better, everyone benefits. Thek stood as the human delegation prepared to depart. Captain Chen, if we implement these approaches, won't they eventually give the Empire advantages over the Coalition? Chen smiled that peculiar human smile once more.
Admiral, if you implement these approaches successfully, the distinction between Empire and Coalition advantages will become irrelevant.
We'll all be adapting so quickly that static advantages won't matter anymore. And that doesn't concern you?
It excites us, Chen replied.
Humans thrive in environments where adaptation matters more than established advantages.
If the galaxy becomes a place where everyone adapts constantly, everyone improves constantly, and everyone cooperates while competing, then everyone wins.
As the human delegation departed, Nixera found herself contemplating a galaxy transformed by human influence.
Not conquered by human military might, but evolved through human approaches to complex challenges. The war was ending, but something much more significant was beginning. The rigid doctrines that had dominated galactic civilization for millennia were giving way to adaptive approaches that could handle any challenge, solve any problem, overcome any obstacle.
The humans had reshaped more than interstellar combat.
They had reshaped the fundamental nature of galactic civilization itself. In the years that followed, historians would mark the Arcturus engagement as the turning point not just in the war, but in the evolution of galactic society. The moment when rigid thinking gave way to adaptive intelligence, when competition transformed into cooperation, when the galaxy learned to embrace change rather than resist it. And, at the center of that transformation were the humans, the species that had refused to accept that there was only one way to fight, one way to think, or one way to solve the challenges of existence among the stars.